connection.
Oh, that's okay, as long as you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Okay, well, basically, I've just been doing some research on some of the articles that you've written over time, and I've kind of found interest on a couple of them.
Okay.
One of them being the article you wrote in 2017 on the internet shutdowns that were occurring in South Africa at the time, potentially all over the world. So I was kind of wondering off that article, based on your writings, what kind of are you predicting to come with the internet regulations in our day and age, and how the regulations of the shutdowns were occurring? What is that gonna cause of backlash in our day and age?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
In your articles, you were talking about the internet being shut down and how that caused a lot of backlash from the civilians.
Yes.
How do you think that kind of affected the civilian life in that area?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, great. So the advent of the internet has enabled a lot of citizens to connect, from just normal communications to that enable citizens to talk to family, to do their jobs, to engage with their communities and decision makers, to enabling in certain contexts medical services to be provided, health services to be provided, social and economic services, a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises and their proprietors depend a lot on the internet. So it affects all aspects of life. And then you get to organizations working on human rights that use the internet to disseminate reports, to talk about decisions made by political leaders, to express themselves. And now you have a situation where the restrictions that we used to see on human rights in public and virtual and that used to happen where people are arrested and prevented from participating in peaceful protest, or that would see somebody writing an opinion piece and it's published in a newspaper, and the next day there's a knock on the door and that person is arrested. Now you've had those restrictions that have been transferred online, and so states are seeing that the internet is a primary medium through which citizens communicate, and they impose restrictions to inhibit that kind of communication. And when you look at it, on the one hand, when you look at these services that the internet has enabled citizens to receive or to provide, whether health or economic services, shutdowns affect everyone across the board. But the point I'm trying to make in the articles and in our work is that when you look at journalists and human rights defenders and activists who use the internet to express themselves and to ensure that their message reaches different parts of the country and across the globe, when the internet is shut down and when there are restrictions on online freedoms, it's basically a strategy by the government to ensure that their ability to express themselves freely is curtailed. So one of the things we've noticed in our work is that shutdowns are really shutdowns increase during politically sensitive periods like elections, constitutional changes in government, when citizens protest. And so governments preempt some of these actions by shutting down the internet to prevent this the actions from taking place. And so it affects basically all aspects of human life.
And I read a part of your article that you said that people are also using other networks, the VPNs, to go around that. Is there people that are is the government catching on to that and then regulating that as well, or have they not really been able to restrict that yet?
So it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on the in countries where citizens are able to do that. I remember very well in Uganda during the 2016 presidential elections, when the internet was shut down, citizens were able to use VPN and other services. So it's a way in which citizens become innovative to bypass these shutdowns. But then governments are beginning to catch on. So if you look at Uganda and Tanzania in Africa, governments have basically said, in Uganda, for example, a tax has been imposed on the internet, and in Tanzania, the government has instituted a tax on all social media users, particularly bloggers. So to be a blogger now in Tanzania, you have to pay a tax and you have to be registered. But in many, many countries, citizens have been able to circumvent those shutdowns, but it can never be the same, right? Because it's only a particular set of citizens that are aware of these innovative ways, the VPNs and other means through which they can continue to communicate. But then, apart from VPNs, I remember in Cameroon and also in Zimbabwe, when the internet was shut down. In Cameroon, the internet was shut down for between 3 to 6 months. And in Zimbabwe, in January of 2019, the internet was shut down when citizens protested. So what happened was that citizens now went back to traditional ways of communicating. So they were using SMS services, and they depended a lot on partners and other stakeholders who were out of those zones where the internet was shut down. So in Cameroon, there was internet in the Francophone section of the country, and so citizens in the Anglophone section where the internet was shut down sent SMSs to their counterparts in Francophone Cameroon, and then they were able to take those messages and publicize them on social media. And it was exactly the same thing that happened in Zimbabwe when the internet was shut down during protests in January 2019.
Has the government been able to block any of the SMS messaging that was processing at that time?
No, they were not able to do that.
Do you predict any of that occurring, like that blockage coming, or is that something that's out of their access?
I think the more citizens become innovative, the more governments follow suit. So governments will do anything possible to ensure that they block those channels. So I envisage that it's something that is likely to happen.
And then I was also reading your article from the one that you just wrote in March about how they're holding the Africa Commission on Human Rights in Egypt and kind of the controversies that are occurring with that.
Yeah.
So I hear that safety is kind of a big issue in that situation right now.
Yeah. I mean, this commission session is still going on. And as Civicus, we made a deliberate decision not to participate in this session because we know that the Egyptian government is using this session. I mean, if you've read the news recently, they hosted the Arab European Summit. They're hosting the African Cup of Nations in July. So the Egyptian government is just interested in hosting all these events. Yeah, to paint a picture of Egypt as a stable and friendly environment. So when the Egyptians proposed to host the African Commission last year, we knew that this was there was trouble brewing. And so, the African Commission session brings together hundreds of African human rights defenders. And it's one of the few platforms where citizens in countries that are unable to speak out can converge, right, and express their views. And so we were worried that the Egyptians will use this to target certain human rights defenders. And I can share you a confidential message that was sent to us by, in fact, one of it, some of it has been published, that was sent to us about how human rights defenders that went to the commission were targeted by security forces. I know of about 70 that were denied visas to enter Egypt. Others, there was a considered attempt to delay, you know, a strategy where you delay the issuing of a visa until the day when the commission starts. So I can share that with you, but it's exactly what I anticipated in the piece that you're talking about, where those who eventually went to Egypt were either targeted, and I was quite worried that you know, gadgets like laptops and cell phones that you know, participants went with would be tampered by the security forces. I don't think I'll be exaggerating if I say some of them, you know, the security forces, they may take those gadgets to under the pretext that they are checking, you know, them for any security related issues. But while doing that, they may even put in some devices that will enable them to track the movements of these human rights defenders.
That's insane. So how do you predict the people do you think that there's safety for the people that are there now? Has there been any incidents that have occurred? I mean, I haven't seen anything on the news.
You mean for the human rights defenders who are there?
Yes.
Not at the moment. Actually, I was worried because, you know, the Egyptian government has jailed foreign journalists in the past. I know of one who has been in jail now for years, right? And I was worried that some of these activists might fall into that unfortunate situation. But nothing has happened now, up until now, apart from the few security incidents that I mentioned a moment ago.
And then I was also reading how you were talking about the bill that he's attempting to pass that's kind of mocking the other president, and he was going to possibly stay in House until 2034. How do you think that will have an impact on the country if that bill passes?
It's already been passed.
It did pass.
Yeah. And Egyptians went in for a referendum to endorse that.
Okay.
So the voter turnout for the referendum was 44%. That means the amount of people who went to vote for the referendum was 40. The number, or the percentage, sorry, was 44, and the percentage of those who voted in favor was 97%. So what it's saying is that Egyptians overwhelmingly voted for the bill that will, you know, enable the president to extend his stay in power. So that means he will contest again for elections in 2024. And we know that he will win those elections. And that means at least he will stay in power until 2030. So we'll basically see an extension of or a prolongation of the human rights violations that are currently taking place in Egypt. And it's very sad for the state of democracy in Egypt, because in 2011 Egyptians protested against these kinds of restrictions, but Al-Sisi, I think, has just decided to continue with these human rights violations. And unfortunately, with these constitutional changes, that also mean that he has more control over the judiciary, and that gives a lot to super is many years of human rights violations, and that will continue at least until about 2030.
What kind of things are occurring that are oppressing human rights other than the shutdown of the internet?
My word. So many civil society organizations have been shut down and their accounts frozen. There are very few human rights defenders in Egypt that can speak publicly about the actions of the president. So this constitutional change, the levels of intimidation during the elections and the referendum, in the past, human rights defenders would be able to raise their concerns publicly. Unfortunately, none is able to do so at the moment because that would mean jail or even death. And so many of the human rights defenders we know cannot even communicate with each other because any
Hello? David?